Universe or multiverse is the spherical representation of all that is on the outside, and a microcosm of that metaphorical expression of possibility within human consciousness is the psyche. And possibility is always spherical because it moves out in all directions. One can look at the technicality, for example, of vision. If you have 20/20 vision in front of you, if you turn your head, you have 20/20 vision to the left and to the right of you. Possibility ripples out neutrally in all directions, up and down, left and right. And so with it, the possibility field, probability field, and actuality field of the human psyche. Now, consciousness interacts with reality through what's called a persona, a mask, a face, an interference pattern. And while the personality as a whole in a healthy individual has cohesion, there are different sides to every person known as persona, or, as we'll be looking at today, identities. Now, an identity is a pattern. When you think of recognizing someone who you know, you have a system for recognition. What you're recognizing is a familiar pattern. And so if you're deciding, is this someone? You will look at perhaps the pattern of their face, the pattern of their hair, the pattern of speech. If you're looking from a distance, you'll assess the pattern of height, of width, and of body motion. Everyone walks slightly different. If you're trying to identify through the lens of fingerprints, you're looking for a distinctive pattern of fingerprint. But all identities, through whichever lens one looks in order to identify them, look for a pattern. And in this case, we're looking at a persona as an identity, as a pattern of thinking, feeling, acting, and speaking. Now, one could just say action, but to differentiate the actually physical implementation of something versus just talking about it, we'll make the distinction of speech. So, one of the things that we observe, if we take a given individual and we observe their thoughts, their feelings, their action, and their speech at a party, at a small, intimate party, at a large party, when alone in nature, when alone watching TV, every context evokes a different pattern of thinking, feeling, acting, and speaking. And one of the things that's going on here is this dynamic interaction between environment or context and the individual. Now, we are all products of our environment, or another way of saying is we are all born out of our environments. The interference pattern between the consciousness that we think of as us and the consciousness we think of as the environment creates a relationship. We are all in a relationship. So it's a rapport that is being constantly reassessed. And to see how constantly it's being reassessed, you can go into just about any identity and shoot a gun or yell fire. And the perceived shift in the environment and context creates an immediate response in our thoughts, our feelings, our behavior, and our speech. So everything is in this relationship, but there's a couple of underlying drives that are invisible but constantly present in the modulation of our identity in response to our outer reality. And these are known as the hierarchy of needs. Now, at a very basic level, meaning a very simple level, every human being in the history of the species has wanted, at some level, to feel sustainably good, and wanted to avoid, at some level, feeling chronically bad. Now, good and bad are on an infinite continuum. So if you are $50,000 in debt, bad is going to $100,000 in debt, assuming for this moment that debt is not what you want. And if you are $50,000 in debt, going to $20,000 in debt is good. If you have $1 million in retirement savings, going to $20,000 in debt is bad. If you have $1 million in retirement savings, going to $500,000 in retirement savings is bad. If you have $10,000 in retirement savings, going to $500,000 in retirement savings is good, assuming you want to retire affluently. And so good and bad are on a continuum, but the drive is constant. One can talk to just about anyone, and there's a sense of dissatisfaction at some level. I want more. I'm not really reaching my full potential. And this is true. At every stage of the continuum, there's always more. And there's an innate drive to move in the direction of feeling sustainably good and away from feeling chronically bad. So it's a continuum. And in a more complex rendition of this same innate drive, Abraham Maslow outlined a hierarchy of human needs. So a hierarchy simply means that you focus on one thing first, and then you only focus on the next thing once the first thing is prioritized, a hierarchy of priorities. And these are not preferences, they're needs, just like oxygen, just like water. We need to move in this direction. And the first one is survival. And so we don't, necessarily typically deal with this on a moment-to-moment basis, but this means enough food, enough medicine, enough shelter, enough resources, enough oxygen, enough water, etc., so that we are surviving. And as soon as that's addressed, we then have a need to increase our safety and security about surviving. So as soon as we've parched our immediate thirst, filled our belly, etc., there's some part of us that seeks to move towards storing a little water away, having access, whether it's access to money, access to some other form of resource that increases our sense of safety, that we can relax as opposed to being in survival deprivation, in chronic anxiety, which all you have to do to feel that is put your hand over your mouth and nose, and you will instantly reduce the body down to a primary drive of survival. And our bodies are in on this drive to survive and feel secure. You cover your nose, your body starts panicking. It doesn't think about esoteric thoughts. It's thinking about meeting its basic need to survive. In this case, what do I have to do to get some oxygen? And if you put that into the future, you're breathing just fine, you're drinking just fine, but you get a news alert saying, there may be no money to be found in upcoming months. There may be no food available in upcoming months. Then even though your body isn't physically in threat in that actual moment, you go into a similar survival orientation of how can I secure the future? And these are just how basic these drives are. Now, level 3 in the hierarchy of needs is love and belonging. And because we have a pack mammalian ancestry, if you think of our ape ancestry, they operate in packs. And there's a reason for that, and it's called synergy. A pack can survive more than an individual. A tribe can survive more than an isolated individual. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And, one of them is if you just put a baby in a cave, even after infancy, when, of course, right after birth, it would be dead within a matter of days. It can't crawl, it can't move. And so there's a state of complete helplessness for an infant. So obviously it's not going to survive on its own. So we all understand innately that we need a tribe to survive, an economic tribe, a social tribe, a logistics tribe. And this ties into just how connected we all are. We may say this is my stuff, right? My stuff. But it's not really my stuff. This is a 20 to 200 million year old rose quartz crystal. It's not really mine. I wasn't even around. It's actually 40 to 200 million years. I wasn't around 40 million years ago when this crystal was forming. And I didn't invent gem cutting. I didn't find the diamonds for the diamond bits that do the polishing on gem cutting. I didn't invent silversmithing. I didn't come up with the idea of a necklace. I didn't do the mining. So you can kind of see that what we consider ours is something that we've cooperatively negotiated with the past and with the present. Because if that past didn't exist, if the Earth didn't exist 20 million years ago, this necklace isn't mine either. Because then the Earth wouldn't have existed long enough to produce humans and wouldn't have existed long enough for it to produce rose quartz. So there's a tremendous link between us and our environment, and we understand that. And without love and belonging, without support and acceptance from a vast amount of people, and it continues backwards, meaning if my ancestors were not accepted by the tribe, I don't exist. If my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, for some reason, was scapegoated, marginalized, outcast, and didn't survive the isolation from the pack, then my great-grandfather didn't exist either, and neither did my parents, and neither do I. So we are innately connected. We need love and belonging in order to survive and feel secure in our survival. Because whatever the system is that we're using to exchange energy as human beings, and in a capitalistic system, the system is primarily capital. And so if you don't have capital, you don't survive. There are millions of Americans right now in one of the wealthiest countries in human history that are in survival and security because they don't have enough money to afford a home. They are homeless in a culture that has produced more than 5,000 separate laws, each of which increased the cost of housing. So we elected governments who in turn passed laws that banned teepees and banned tiny houses and banned sleeping in our cars and banned sleeping in a tent in state parks and banned sleeping on the sidewalk. So all of the low-cost housing options were made illegal for our own good. In my county, the average home costs $1.2 million. It is illegal to build a house costing less than $600,000. The local shelter that produces low-cost housing at a rate of 12 units or less per year spends $650,000 per unit for a unit of low-cost housing. So in a culture that has made low-cost housing illegal, because if you say, well, I'll just filter my own water with reverse osmosis, like, no. You have to get water where everyone else gets it from the municipal water district. Okay, fine, I'll get some. Well, first you have to pay the $50,000 hookup fee. Well, that's already, just to hook up to one utility, that's already more than 90% of the world's population can afford for an entire home, $50,000. And, and so when we do depend on one another. In this case, we depend upon one another for an empathy that is lacking, because in the pyramidal structure of power in a capitalist framework, where money in many ways is valued more than the people who make it, which is mathematically unsound, but cults are not mathematically intelligent. You can literally have a culture that values the product of an individual more than the individual that created the product, which, as I say, is not sound mathematics. Because if the product has X value, then the entity that created the product, by definition, has more value than the product they make. And yet you ask, the average American, would you like my salary for a year, or would you like me for a year? I don't know what to do with you. I'll take the salary. And thus elevating a symbol of value more than the underlying asset, the golden egg more than the golden goose, even though, of course, the golden egg can't make anything on its own. It takes people to do something useful with that gold. And so we have a need for love and belonging, which builds on our need for survival and security, because without love and belonging, we do not survive. Certainly we don't have security. We're an isolated individual. And at worst, a fugitive, an outcast, a scapegoat for a system that wants to kill off that particular expression of the human possibility and probability field. And so these needs, the next being self-esteem, the opportunity to aspire to be someone that we admire, because all self-esteem is the process of first identifying an ideal of hard work, an ideal of honesty, an ideal of empathy, an ideal of excellence, whatever the ideal is. Self-esteem is the process of first identifying an ideal. This is who we want to be. This is who we admire and want to move towards. And then this is how well we're doing at that. I really admire honest people, and I want to be honest. And I'm succeeding 70% of the time, meaning 7 out of every 10 things I say are basically honest. So I'd give myself 70%. Or if the standard is all or nothing, If you tell one lie, you've lost it all. Then 7 out of 10 doesn't cut it. I'm failing miserably, depending on how it's evaluated, particularly in high-stakes impact activity, betrayal, murder, lying around important things. If a lie or a betrayal causes enough damage, usually you lie once and it's caught and recognized, and that's it. People don't trust you. They rank you down at 0 because the next thing might be another lie, and it might cause a similar amount of damage. So there's some things that are not in a nice bell curve of, I only lied 70% of the time. I only lied 10% of the time. I only lied 1% of the time. I said I wouldn't sleep with your best friend. I said it 100 times. I only lied once. It was a particular afternoon, and that's, but that's enough in some situations to cancel the entire thing out. And self-esteem is often correlated strongly with group acceptance. So if everyone is behaving like an idiot, it's sometimes just fine within a particular group. Or if only one person is behaving excellently, everyone's lying and only one person is telling the truth, and there's some hostility. It's like, why do you think you're better than us, or somehow jeopardizing our status quo here? And so this speaks to the fact that the individual, more and more in a synthetic environment, meaning every single thing in this picture is synthetic. This wasn't how this face was born. This wasn't how this beard naturally grew. This hat didn't grow on a tree, nor did the shirt, nor did this, nor did the phone, nor did the green screen, nor did the chalk. Every single thing in this frame is synthetic. And everything that is synthetic depends on the cooperation of other human beings to invent the technology, not only the technology of making fabric, but of dyeing fabric, of shipping fabric, of selling fabric, of transferring money online. All these different technologies are all predicated on cooperation from other human beings. And so to lose that, certainly, is a traumatic event. When one finds oneself as an outcast in one form or another is a traumatic event, because as an outcast, one cannot depend on the cooperation of others. And there's different levels of outcast. There's social outcast, there's legal outcast, there's environmental outcast, there's economic outcast. There's all kinds of different gradients, but each form of being outcast increases the likelihood that we will not survive physically, emotionally, financially, socially, mentally. And so there is a trauma, the experience of being hit with an awareness that is bigger than the identity that is experiencing it. Trauma is a transcendent event because it is an encounter with energy that has the ability to shatter the pattern of thought, feeling, action, and speaking that we're currently occupying. And it's very important to understand that we need, as consciousness, an interface with reality, which is a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing. And if we are to experience relaxation and well-being on that underlying continuum towards wanting to feel sustainably good and wanting to avoid feeling chronically bad, one of the most important differentiators in whether we feel security or whether we feel traumatized and helpless is confidence. Now, confidence comes from successfully doing something. In order to have real confidence, not just putting on a scared facade, one actually has to have experienced successfully doing something. Meaning, if you tried to make some oatmeal and got a burnt mess, and then you tried again and got a burnt mess, then you tried again and set the house on fire, there is no logical basis for you to have confidence in your ability to make oatmeal. In fact, if anything, you have confidence that you cannot make oatmeal, because every single time you try, you fail. The same is true with love and belonging. If every time you have a romantic relationship, one or both of you or the other gets desperately damaged and it blows up in your face, one has no basis to have confidence in one's ability to have a successful, loving relationship, to feel sustainably good on an intimate level. One has, in fact, confidence of the opposite. I have complete confidence that in one way or another, I will fuck it up, because every single time I've attempted it, I have fucked it up. And so there's a very good basis for that confidence. So confidence comes from memory. Confidence comes from memory and mastery. When one has a pattern that says all I have to do is say these things, do these things, think these things, and feel these things, and voila, I have a bowl of oatmeal that tastes just the way I like it. Voila, I turn nothing into a paycheck of X amount. Voila, someone I didn't know before now enjoys spending time with me. And I look at that and say, I can articulate it, I know what the pattern is, and I can reasonably predict the future based on the past. Now, as one deals with an incredibly complex environment, one deals with probability fields, meaning I may not be at a level where I can confidently pick the person who I will have a successful relationship with. Because I picked this person and that blew up in my face a week later. I picked this person and I wasn't even interested, but I thought I would be, but then I wasn't. And then I picked this person and I was interested, but they weren't. And I picked this person and it worked out. So I have a 25% track record. If you go through that process 5 or 6 times and you realize it takes 4 tries to get one that somewhat works out, and then I have no confidence in having kind of an idyllic relationship. I've never had that. But I've got a 1 in 4 chance of making outreach or having people make outreach to me, and there's a 1 in 4 chance that it will be better than nothing. And thus the relationship will perpetuate. Because if it's not better than nothing, one or both people end it. It takes 2 to say yes, 1 to say no. It's unlikely that 2 people who say this is much worse than nothing are going to continue it. And even if you say it's better than nothing, if they say no, it isn't, it's not better than nothing, it ends anyway. And so that is the metric of confidence. Now, what a human being can do, unlike a chimpanzee on a conscious level, is there's some areas where we are incredibly confident. Meaning let's back up. 99.99% of the time when I step on a floor, it doesn't give way or burst into flames. So I'm very confident walking on floors. I don't even think about it. I'm so confident. I'm very confident about being able to move my pinky. It works every time. I'm incredibly insecure when it comes to performing as a lover, because I don't have a track record of successful experience in that domain. It's just, it's like 1 in 10, or never. And I haven't changed anything. It's not like I've gone to school and become a great lover, and so now I've got confidence based on experimentation and learning this and that and the other. It's just like, I have no confidence here. And that's legitimate. Meaning you shouldn't have confidence that you can do something that you've never done and that has no close relationship with anything you've never done. Like if you've walked on a marble floor and it's never burst into flames, and then you've walked in a wood floor and it's never burst into flames, you can have relative confidence to say, I'll walk on a bamboo floor and it's probably not going to burst into flames. Oh, it didn't. Now I have confidence about that too. So confidence comes from experience, and the projection of past experience onto the future. And it's, and while we're on this subject of projection, every human being wants to feel sustainably good and wants to avoid feeling chronically bad. That's a given. That's an innate drive, and it's a healthy drive. Now, pain is feeling bad. Pain is separation from something we long for. So if I want control and I feel out of control, I feel pain. Psychological pain, at the very least. If I want to move my arm, but my arm is severed, meaning someone took a machete and cut off the arm, and I want to move it, and I want to be whole, there's pain, physical pain. I want to be a whole functioning body, but I'm not. I'm in pain. If I want to be close to someone and I'm not, I'm in pain. Emotional pain. Loneliness, isolation, pain. Now, all pain is separation from and longing for something that we want, of course. If we long for it, we want it. That's given. Now, fear is the anticipation of pain in the future. Now, there's no reason to anticipate, since we don't want pain. Nobody wants pain. So why would we anticipate pain in the future? Because we've had pain in the past. Pain represents a failure in many ways. So if I've experienced massive amounts of unwanted pain, it means that I was helpless. Helpless to what? Helpless to stop the pain. Because if all I had to do was snap my fingers and the pain went away sustainably, not just, a cocaine hit or something like that, but went away sustainably. Because, of course, the first time you take cocaine or opium or crack or whatever, you think you've hit the jackpot if you have no knowledge of statistics. In fact, cocaine was a tonic for depression. Coca-Cola used to have cocaine in it as one of the many cocktails prescribed by doctors because it boosts your mood. Feeling a bit depressed, have a bit of cocaine. And your doctor it wasn't even regulated. But when you understand hedonic adaptation and you understand that, cocaine has a cycle of diminishing returns, it's not really sustainable. Meaning if your life sucks and so you're depressed and all you do is take some cocaine, it's going to take, first, wow, it's wonderful, feels good. We're making progress. But tomorrow your life still sucks. And so you need a little bit more cocaine to anesthetize the pain and stimulate the brain. And if your life still sucks on the third day, you're going to need even more cocaine. And eventually it crashes, meaning it didn't work. That's not a path. I've actually got to make my life worth living, and I don't know how to do that. I know how to drink Coke. I don't know how to make a life worth living. So I've failed. Now, when we understand that the ego and the identities within the ego are fractal representations of the culture around us, that there have been 10,000 cultures in human history, each with their own language, each with their own mythology, their own belief system, their own hierarchy of values. What I mean by hierarchy of values is, do you value pleasure or honesty more in a given situation? Well, in this situation, I'd rather be told a white lie about how good I look, right? Even though I'm fat and gaining weight. Screw honesty. I want pleasure. I want to be told a white lie. But, when it comes to the resume of my brain surgeon, I'd like the truth, thank you very much. I don't want someone who's never done a brain surgery or gone to medical school who made me feel better by lying before he chopped up my brain and killed me. And so in that situation, I'd like honesty over pleasure. And so there's a hierarchy of every single value: beauty, joy, wonder, excitement, freedom. And every person has their hierarchy based in part on the past. If you've never been free, you generally value it more than someone who's been free all the time, who might feel overwhelmed with freedom. Erich Fromm wrote a book called Escape from Freedom. One of the draw of dictators, either in romantic relationship, in parenting, or in national dictators such as Adolf Hitler. Escape from Freedom represented the rise, or was referencing the rise of the Third Reich. Why did the Germans appreciate an autocratic father figure in the form of Adolf Hitler, who never had any doubts about what should be done and was quite happy to carry them out immediately and decisively with precision. And there's something very comforting for someone that lacks confidence in having someone else who has confidence. Like, I'm glad somebody knows what they want and what to do. I don't. And so you often have the pairing in relationships between highly assertive and highly submissive types, because the submissive type will just sit around getting fat, watching TV, and feeling paralyzed without someone to tell them what to do. And so if you get a benevolent dictator, someone who will say, come on, go out and get a degree. You can do it. Do this and do that and run 10 miles a day. Then they find to their great delight that life is getting better. They're succeeding at feeling sustainabably better because they've submitted to an authority figure that happens to know a few things. On the other hand, if all your dictators or assertive figures have been abusive, come on, slave over me, do what I want, ruin your life for my benefit, then the drive to seek independence and freedom tends to go up because submission isn't working. Every child originally submitted to their parents. If they didn't survive. So every child has a sympathy with the context in which it's born. And if that sympathy results in great abundance, if they rapidly survive, feel secure, have a sense of love and belonging, develop self-esteem, develop their innate inner gifts, bring those gifts out to the world abundantly and become part of a larger sense than themselves, the family system, the community, the greater ecology, a religion, whatever it is, if that all works well by submitting, then it's like, who wants to rebel? This is working so well. We're continually moving up the continuum of feeling sustainably good, and we're not feeling sustainably bad, so don't mess with it, right? Why fix a working system? But someone who's been molested in childhood, been beaten for telling people about it, been teased at school for being a victim of sexual abuse, then humiliated by the teacher for not being able to learn while being traumatized, then told that you're a good for nothing in the workplace, again, because you got bad grades because you were processing trauma in school rather than going to learn. Well, suddenly the system isn't really working for you, is it? And so rebellion of the system that's killing you becomes a healthy drive. So the more people have been violated by an imperfect system, the more rebellion is valued, the more freedom is valued. Freedom to do what? To diverge from the norm, because the norm's killing me. The norm is the enemy of my goal, just like everyone else's goal to feel sustainably good and avoid feeling chronically bad. The norm is my enemy. So, everyone has a unique hierarchy of values that correlates in their mind with the best strategy to fulfilling their human needs. And I talked about the psyche being a microcosm of the inner world, or the universe. The universe on the outside has a universe on the inside called the psyche. The psyche is like the stem cell of consciousness that has developed 10,000 cultures on this planet alone in human history, in known history. And there's some anthropologists that suggest that history is much larger than our known history and different ancient civilizations. But in our known history, anthropologists say, there have been about 10,000 cultures, 10,000 cults, 10,000 languages, mythologies, etc. And every culture reaches out to the children in its cult environment and says, hey, do it the way we've done it, because then you'll survive. Then you'll feel secure in your survival. If you're like us, we'll love you and you'll belong. And then you can feel good about yourself. You can have the same values we do. You can decide to project the ideal that our cult has for you. If you're an American, you can have the ideal of being highly productive. Well, what's that? Well, you take lots of natural resources and you make them into things that will sell for a lot of money. And then you sell them to people and you make a lot of money. Be productive, be productive. And then once you're productive, be efficient at being highly productive. And what? Well, you'll get it all. You will be happy. You will feel sustainably good and avoid feeling chronically bad. And on the promise and the basis of that promise, the American individual consumes more natural resources per capita than any cult in human history, than any individual in any cult in human history, per capita. Because sure, in the Tsar times of Russia, etc., gold toilet knobs and silver-plated plates and all this stuff for the king. But the rest were just consuming potatoes and paying taxes to the Tsar. And so on a per capita basis, for example, an American is going to leave 102 metric tons of garbage in a landfill or an incinerator. So 100 tons of waste natural resources per capita. That's a lot. When you consider that 500 years ago, the Native Americans on the same land would leave less than 5 pounds of garbage. But even that's a little bit mislabeling, because they didn't have an idea of garbage, because there was nothing that they had no use for. There was nothing that wasn't part of the whole. Because someone died, their body would go into the ground and fertilize the plants around it. If their furs or jewelry was buried with them, bone and stuff deteriorated and mineralized the soil. It wasn't waste. It was an honored object. The teepee could be used by somebody else if it was too old. It could be rolled up and laid in the grass and deteriorate as leather and wood, or be used as kindling. There was no waste. And so we've not only created the idea of waste, all ideas stem from language, and we invented the word garbage to define energy we didn't want. and didn't have the imagination to do something with. And then having defined this idea of waste, we then created a lot of it. 102 tons per capita if you're an American. And then when you don't really want global warming, having 1,500 metric tons of CO2 per capita into the individual. Consuming 90,000 gallons of gasoline per individual. So by the time your products have been harvested by gasoline out of the environment, shipped to a factory with gasoline, manufactured by machines on gasoline with workers who drove to the factory with gasoline, made your products, hauled the garbage from the factory to a landfill with gasoline, bulldozed the landfill with gasoline, sent the product to you by gasoline, had you drive around with and in the product with gasoline. The average American consumes 90,000 gallons of gas, which translates into a lot of that 1,500 metric tons of CO2. So it's a lot of energy consumed by just one cult in the entire history of cults. And this brings into the definition of intelligence, because intelligence can be measured by the efficiency with which energy, time, money, and natural resources are consumed to produce what we all want, sustainable well-being. So a highly intelligent person needs very little time, very little natural resources, and very little money to create large amounts of sustainable well-being for those and those they care about, which ripples out. Because if you care about your family, you care about the people around your family, at least not to get Ebola or swine flu. Because if the people around your family get Ebola and swine flu, then your family gets swine flu, and then you get swine flu. So if you care about yourself, you care about the people around you. And if you care about the people around you, you care about the people around them, and the people around them. Such that to be 100% self-ish, to really do what's best for you, is to act in a way that is best for everyone. Because there's not really a point at which you think, oh, it's really a good idea if this group gets infectiously sick, or starts rioting, or goes to war, or cuts down all their natural resources in desperation of short-term thinking to fulfill a capitalist model that measures the speed and efficiency with which natural resources are transformed into commodities, regardless of whether those commodities actually deliver a high yield of sustainable well-being. So this is the backdrop of identity. We enter an environment and we explore. We enter an environment and we explore. And what we're exploring is our own level of intelligence. What we're exploring is, in this environment, how can I spend as little time, money, and natural resources as possible in a pattern that yields the most amount of sustainable well-being for me and those I care about and those they care about, and out and out and out? How can I do that? Now, if I go into a bar and I need survival, I need security, and I need love and belonging, and nobody wants to talk with me unless I'm drinking, well, I develop a drinking identity. If I go outside and nobody really wants to engage with me unless I'm smoking, I develop a smoking identity to survive, to feel secure, to feel a sense of love and belonging, to have a sense of self-esteem, to develop my gifts. If all the business deals happen on the golf course, I develop a golfing identity Now, a golfing identity is a very high energy consumptive identity because you've got to cut down a lot of trees. You've got to bring in a lot of equipment to take a large area of land to turn it into native habitat for Scotland, where golfing was invented. They didn't have to create golf courses in Scotland. They were there. They just mowed them and decided, what can we do? So you have intelligence often when things are initially created. It's much like the warehouse movement, in modern architecture, where at one point there were all these empty warehouses. And they had big metal beams and square shapes and minimalist looks. And one day someone said, wouldn't it be intelligent, rather than tearing these warehouses down and building far more expensive housing, to just buy them, develop a meme of modern warehouse ethic, and then call them warehouse look, modern architecture? Well, that was intelligent, meaning it took very little energy, time, money, and natural resources to do that. And so it created lower cost housing, etc. But then the modern ethic was cool. So more people wanted to be modern. So then they tore down nice homes and imported synthetic renditions of warehouses so they could create the warehouse look, to be hip. And so suddenly the intelligence is lost. The hipness is there because cultures are not generally very intelligent. But the underlying logic of the problem, there's a bunch of empty warehouses that are selling on the cheap, lots of people need housing, let's create a warehouse look and make money and provide lower cost housing. That doesn't make sense to tear down a nice Victorian cottage, because that's outdated, right? That's old-fashioned. And then I'm going to import an authentic warehouse from, halfway around the world? I'm going to bring a vintage recycled door from Germany. And isn't it cool how I've used recycled materials, but I've just shipped it halfway around the world? I've got doors that could have worked at the local antique store. But no, I wanted an authentic recycled German door for who knows why. And so suddenly the idea of recycling goes out the window, because you're spending more money to ship products just so they can be recycled from far away, because the idea of recycling has transcended the actual functionality of saying, here's something laying in the backyard, rather than spend more money and shipping something around the world to fit in with the norm, let's recycle this. It's just that when that catches on and becomes a meme, now they have to actually manufacture old, funky, weird stuff just so it can copy the meme. In other words, it loses its intelligence as a majority adopts it in many cases, which is one of the reasons on the bell curve of adaptation that the majority is never correct, meaning the majority is never the most intelligent. A distinct minority that is developing the new meme in a specific niche environment is far more correct than the majority that will later adopt it just to fit in, just to be normal. It becomes the new norm. And so you can think of the ego and the individual identity as being a fractal representation of the larger shape, which is the environment in which it's nested. And a sustainable identity, a sustainable ego, this is me, I am the one who says this, does this, thinks this, and feels this. How do I know I'm me? Because I felt and thought those things yesterday, and I'm doing it again today, so it must be me because I recognize the pattern. I was that yesterday, and I'm still that today, so I'm still me. I was thinking loads of horrible thoughts yesterday, and the day before, and the day before, and today I'm feeling really grateful and happy. What's wrong with me? I'm not me. It's something's off. What's going on? Why have I diverged from the known identity? And this is troubling to people in part due to high traumatic loads, because change equals the unknown, and the unknown equals uncertainty, and uncertainty equals fear in a past filled with pain. Because, to go back, fear is pain that was not resolved, solved, and ended in the past, projected on the future, creating the anxiety, the fear of experiencing the same pain again. Meaning, if you've been rejected by 10 lovers, and every single time you felt 7 to 9 out of 10 pain, when you approach a new lover, without understanding why that occurred and what to do about it, your body tells you you've got a more than 90% probability that you're going to be feeling 7 to 9 out of 10 pain. Because that's what happens. Not at the beginning, or maybe at the beginning. Whenever it happens, that's what happens. And so your body tightens up. Why? Because it doesn't want to feel pain. No human being wants to feel chronically bad. We all want to feel sustainably good. So if every time we approach a certain person and they yell at us 50% of the time or whatever, or even they yell at us 1 in 50 times, but when they do, it is just devastating. I feel 2 years old. I feel this. Oh, it's just devastating. We don't know what the pattern is. We haven't figured out that they're an addict and that the times they yell at us are when they couldn't get their crack. That bit's invisible to us, so we don't know what's going on. Have they got their crack? Even if we know that it's about crack, we don't know if today they've got it or not. We don't know until we knock on the door. And the uncertainty of that is terrifying, because it changes us. If we were warm and friendly and filled with gratitude and pleasure, and then some ragged, frantic-looking individual opens the door, maybe carrying a baseball bat or whatever, and says, "Get the fuck out of my space," and never come back. But we've got to come back because they're our neighbor or they're our landlord or whatever it is. They're our mother-in-law. So you've got to come back at some point. You just don't know who you're going to meet. They're two different identities. The identity when they've got their drugs and the identity when they're in withdrawal symptoms. And we don't know what's coming and we can't control it. So there's anxiety because they could shatter our identity with their identity. They could hit us with an energy field that leaves us unable to sustain gratitude, joy, relaxation, laughter, whatever it is that we're sustaining. And so we're afraid of that. So fear is pain unresolved in the past that is intelligently projected onto the future. I mean, people say, well, live in the now, this and that and the other. Hey, if you've grown up with an abusive father and then found 3 abusive partners, and then you're going to pretend that without understanding abuse and trauma and abuse contracts and why you pick them and all of that, it's suddenly going to just pop and change without understanding the mechanism behind it? You're out to lunch and you know it, which is why your body gets anxious. Now, if you had an abusive father and you analyzed the abuse and you read some psychology and you gave back the shame because it has nothing to do with how you were born. You were born great. You didn't deserve that abuse, and you get it. You understand why your inner child thinks it's all his fault, and you do all of that, and you say, these are the patterns of abuse. I've had enough of that for one lifetime, and I'm going to pick someone who doesn't do those things. And the cues that they do them are this and this and this. So are they an addict? Are they a secret addict? And I know how to deal with that, and I know how to sort through. And so the partner I create is a wonderful person without an addict, and we separate amicably, to go off and do our own things. And the next partner I created, again, a wonderful person who isn't an addict, and we separate. Well, when you meet the next person, you have no basis to feel terrified. But if you were just abused and believed that you are a bad person because that's what your abuser told you, and that's what your teacher told you, and your friends didn't treat you that well either, and your boss certainly wasn't interested in your well-being, he just was using you for gratification to make the company money, or you were disposable, and then you go and create a partner who treats you the exact same way, you've got zero basis to not be terrified about the next relationship. Because you've got 100% statistics saying that for whatever reason, you're in an environment that predisposes you to abuse. And, if you haven't magically been moved to a completely different environment or understood the pattern and broken out of it, and breaking out of a pattern is like taking off in a rocket. There's an incredible gravitational pull that keeps you to the familiar. It keeps you to the known pattern. In part because we're terrified of the unknown. The fear of the unknown is a gravitational pull, so it takes tremendous effort to break orbit out of a destructive pattern. Now, once we're out of the orbit of the destructive pattern, once we've broken the attachment to the known, it takes almost no energy when you're out in space. When you're out in that chaos and fluid energy out beyond the Earth's orbit, out beyond that gravitational pull, it doesn't take any energy at all. A little bit of a jet flame here and you head off. There's very little resistance. But it takes enormous effort to break orbit. And even that is something we may not understand at all. So willpower is worth understanding in this terrain. Willpower works as a short burst, is what scientists say. There's actually chemicals in the body that relate to making a willed effort, and it's a muscle. And no one has unlimited willpower. So you can do a burst, like you can use willpower to break orbit. If you put all your energy in a concentrated effort to leave a destructive relationship, to leave a destructive home, to leave a destructive country, to leave a destructive job, you put all your energy to breaking orbit. And then once you're out there in the unknown, you have to know what to do with that, because you can't just be in a dissociated place spinning around in space. You've got to reintegrate, you've got to reconnect with a new system. If you break off of the Earth's orbit, now you're out in space. Well, you've got a certain amount of time before you've got to land again on another part of Earth or the same part or a new planet that is sustainable. You've dissociated, that's an act of will. But now, how are you going to get back? And that will works for that type of transition. What it doesn't work for is, for example, using willpower to relax in an abusive environment. So your partner hits you over the head with a beer bottle and rapes you, and you use willpower to calm yourself down, relax, think of the positive. He only rapes you. It's not normally more than once a week, maybe once a month. It's not a big deal. It'll soon pass. All things come to an end. And, then the next day you use more willpower to, this, and then it's been a while, It's like he's due for another beating and raping. And so I'm going to use willpower to let go and reduce my fear. Willpower doesn't work for chronically changing an identity in the face of an environment that doesn't support that identity. So you're here, and identities form in response to the larger environment, because the environment tells you, through pain and pleasure program rewards, what you have to do to survive in that environment, what you have to do to feel secure in that environment, what you have to do to feel love and belonging, what you have to do to feel self-esteem, what you have to do to develop your gifts, etc. The environment dictates that protocol to you. Now, if you want to change, meaning sociopathic environments require a reptilian program in your brain, which is why we have the reptilian brain. If you find yourself in a circle of sociopaths, sociopathic parents, sociopathic teachers, sociopathic governments, sociopathic friends, sociopathic media, sociopathic lover. Okay, so you're surrounded by sociopaths who are operating from their reptilian brain. That's where sociopaths operate from, because the reptilian brain is sociopathic. It's not empathic. It can't feel other than fear. Fear of pain. So who are the sociopaths? They're not born sociopaths. They're children whose brains were exposed to repeated chronic pain, which produced high fear of that pain happening again, and high drives to avoid that pain at all costs. Well, in a sociopathic environment, you avoid excess pain by being a sociopath. Meaning, if every time someone on the side of the road says, "Please help me," and you stop and they hit you over the head with a tire iron, steal your car, and leave you for dead on the side of the road, well, obviously that's a sociopathic person masking, adopting a sociopathic identity of a perceived, to pull on people who are empathic. But the person who experiences that 2 or 3 times stops being empathic. Because when they're empathic, their survival goes down in a reptilian environment. Their security goes down. Their love and belonging goes down. Because reptiles use each other. They don't love each other, they use each other. So if you get knocked over the head with a tire iron for helping someone by the side of the road, and now you don't have a car, and you have a high medical bill while you can't get to work, if you're surrounded by reptiles, the message is, you dumb fuck, why did you help that guy on the side of the road? I'm not going to help you. You're too dumb. I can't use you anymore because you've been weakened. You're a fool for being kind amongst reptiles. And I'm not a fool. I'm a reptile who recognizes that you are useless to me. The only people I'm going to have anything to do with are top dog reptiles who have accumulated through sociopathic enterprises more money, more resources, more political power, etc., and we'll make deals together to exploit more out of those who are empathic, those that are gullible. And this is the reptilian protocol. And so the gullible people die off in a sociopathic environment. The empathic people die off in a sociopathic environment. And all that are left are reptiles capable of functioning in a reptilian environment. So your empathy dies off. And if you use willpower to be kind while someone's shooting you, you're dead. And so one of 2 things happens as your identity of the empath collapses. Either you use willpower to break orbit with your sociopathic environment and travel to a new environment in which who you want to be as an empathic person is honored. Because this is the thing. There is an identity that is rewarded in every environment more than other identities. And there is an environment that rewards whatever identity you want to be. And so you have a choice as your identity interacts with the environment and you get a feedback loop going. You can adapt to do what is most rewarded in that environment, whatever that is, and you will generally survive, feel secure, have some sense of some version of love and belonging, at least collaboration and acceptance, which is all a reptile can do. Or you get killed, or you lose rank and go down to the bottom, or you shift into another environment that supports the identity that you want to be. If I want to be warm and friendly with neighbors, and that's who I want to be, and I live in New York, or I live in the ghetto, I'm not going to be able to use willpower indefinitely. But if I get in a plane, use willpower to strategically find warm, empathic communities around the world, and I get in a plane and I go somewhere where if you're not friendly, people don't want you around. But if you're friendly with neighbors, they say, you're one of us. You fit right in. You have cultivated an identity that we want. And so please hang around. So this is the choice of the individual. We do not have the choice to sustainably be a reptile in an empathic environment, or to sustainably be an empath in a reptilian environment. It takes a culture around us to sustain every identity. And what this means is that in the possibility field of the human psyche, 99%, or maybe 90+% of all identities that are possible are not supported in any cult on the planet today. There have been more than 10,000 cults in human history. Most of them are dead because those cultures, when they made contact with the voracious appetite of Western culture, didn't survive. You see, when the Europeans came to North America, they didn't see a culture that they could learn from because they didn't understand intelligence. They understood culture. They didn't understand that intelligence is measured by the efficiency with which an individual or a culture turns time, money, and natural resources into human well-being sustainably. Now, if they had, they would come from a highly polluted, highly abusive, impoverished, shame-based, sexually repressed culture that consumed massive amounts of resources unsustainably. And they would emerge in a culture that had no waste, that had high levels of vitality, low levels of depression and mental emotional disease, was highly skillful, that had no homeless. You see, the Native Americans didn't create homeless people the way we do today. Millions of Americans are homeless. None of the Native Americans were homeless. They didn't need money in the traditional sense. The land was a shared asset. They had high levels of nature, a very high level of daily experience. Their view of the world was better than 90% of our view. Power poles, advertising, billboards, gas stations, ugly roads, ugly architecture. They didn't look at any of that. They spent less energy than we did to have a higher quality of life in a number of metrics. And so an intelligent culture would learn from a more intelligent culture. But an unintelligent culture, as is the problem in research with Nassim Taleb, he's pointed out that highly intelligent people have the intelligence to measure the intelligence of themselves and of highly intelligent people. But highly ignorant, highly unintelligent people do not have the intelligence to measure their own intelligence or the intelligence of those around them. And unintelligent people overrate their own intelligence. And in the case of the Europeans, there was an overrating of the value of the culture that was being imported and an underrating of a culture and series of cultures that were superior on many metrics. And it's only in retrospect, having matured a little bit in a few hundred years, that it is even conceivable to acknowledge that fact. Because cults maintain themselves by maintaining the status quo. And every cult in human history has said that its way of doing things is better than anyone else's way of doing things. So you have 10,000 cults in human history that each said our way is best, is better than any other way. Just like we do today. Our way is best. It's better than any other way. But if you look at it mathematically, how statistically likely is it that our cult is better than 9,999 if you were just rolling the dice? Now, that odds that it is the best out of all of them goes down significantly. It's not just 1 in 10,000 when you understand the massive amounts of pain and the massive consumption of resources that we use to create chronic levels of pain for large demographics of our people, and the degree and speed with which we are damaging the host body of which we are integrally connected. So it's very difficult to say that we're the most intelligent cult in human history when we're spending more energy per capita than any cult in human history and have higher levels of chronic mental, physical, emotional, and relational pain than many of our cultural ancestors that we know about. But an identity is fostered by the environment in which we live. So if we are in an insane cultural environment, it is very difficult to be sane and survive, feel secure, have a sense of love and belonging, develop self-esteem when everyone hates you for being different, develop the gifts that the culture lacks the sophistication to value. For example, our cult doesn't value art. So if you're an artist, the stereotype is that you are a starving artist. Now, why are you a starving artist? You're a starving artist because you're in a cult that doesn't value art. Now, just because the cult doesn't value art, does that mean that art is valueless? Or does it mean that you are in a chauvinistic abuse cult that irrationally suppresses that which is feminine, spontaneous, artistic, at the expense of irrationally overvaluing masculinity, consumption and productivity more and more efficiently, even when the science dictates that that's not the play? If you understand that as a species, not just as individuals, we need to survive, feel secure in our survival, feel love and belonging. When we understand that we're passing a country and a culture and a planet to our children that is less sustainable than the one we inherited, and we still have the same needs that we've always had to survive, feel secure, to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically bad, this is the rational cue to change direction. But cults are not rational. They are dogmatic, and they are self-perpetuating. They are self-perpetuating by using a self-referential loop of data rather than an intelligence which references other things. A cult sustains itself by saying, this is what we do, and that's why we do it. And this is what we do because we did it before. And it was the right thing to do before, and so it's the right thing to do now. And that's why we do it, and that's why I say that's the thing to do. So you see in that entire data loop, there is no reference to intelligence or comparative options. There's no thought like, what if we all stopped saying, how are you, I'm fine, and said, namaste, I honor something beautiful in you? Would well-being go up per unit of energy expended? Does it take more time to say, how are you, I'm fine, how are you, I'm fine, or I honor something beautiful in you? Does it take more time? No. Does it take more money? No. Does it take more natural energy? No. Do people feel better? Possibly. We haven't given it a try. Well, let's give it a try. Do you feel better? Oh, I like it. Okay, let's do that. No. No. It's not what we do because it's not what we did. Because that's not what we do, because that's not what we did. And that's the end of the story. It's not a science-based, because science references external variables. In this case, the innate drive to feel sustainably better and to avoid feeling chronically bad. So the other thing to be aware of is how does a cult, how does a group, how does a family crush the identity of a child, of a citizen, of an individual, of a member? Well, it does it through a pain, pleasure, reward system, which means that if you do the thing that you want to do, we will not accept you. We will criticize you. We won't buy your products. We won't help you survive, meet your needs. If you do it the way we want you to do it, we will. So that works. Now, in a free culture with a fair amount of diversity, certain people can just find their groups and move around, and you can say, well, I'd rather live in a warm country and be a warm state, and then you go to the South. You know, let's say you go to New Orleans and people are more friendly than they are in New York. And so you can move around if you've got freedom of movement and things like that. But even if you move to New Orleans, you may not find support to build a tiny house community that cuts 90% of the living environment costs and increases the sense of community that may violate building codes. And if you do something intelligent in violation of building codes, the police come and haul you out of your intelligent home and destroy it. Why? Not because it's intelligent, but because it's normal to do that. It maintains the status quo, which is every cult's primary objective. Now, I talked about the universe of the psyche as a microcosm, a fractal representation of the multiverse or universe of outer form. And it's very much like a color wheel. Now, color is an infinite continuum. You and I probably would have difficulty naming more than 50 or 60 different distinct colors. But a computer can break down the color spectrum to 256 million colors. Colors that are so slightly different from one another that the human eye can't tell the difference between 256 millionth and 999,000 color. You know, we can't, it looks the same to me. But it's an infinite continuum. A more powerful computer could create 1 billion, 1 trillion different colors because they're just slight gradients in light patterns in energy intensity as registered by the eye or registered by a scientific eye, a machine that can tell more colors than a human eye can. Now, the psyche has the full color spectrum of human state within it. And it's an infinite color spectrum as well. You could refract the psyche into 1,000 archetypes. An archetype is kind of an objective symbolic metaphor for that extreme direction within the psyche. You could say that the warrior is total red, for example. Well, it's a metaphor. It's not that there is a total red. There's always something a little bit more brilliant and red and all that. But the archetypes represent the fictitious ideal, the metaphorical ideal. If you head this direction in the psyche with no deviation, you'll ultimately get closer and closer to the ideal of that pure color within the psyche. And they're called archetypes. And there are many, many systems of archetypes. They're usually dumbed down to a level where the human brain can grasp them, because we have a hard time remembering more than about 12 things at a time. And so it's not that there aren't infinite colors. We just like to name about 12 of them. And it's not that there aren't infinite, archetypal expressions of the psyche, but we like to kind of keep them at a system where we can remember them. And so this system is just one of many systems. But for example, the sage, the wise one, and then we have the fool. So those are two different directions, the wise one and the fool. Every archetype, just like every color, just like every mineral or every substance, has a positive and negative potential relative to our well-being. Think of salt. Is it good? Is it bad? If you don't have any salt, you die. If you have too much salt, you die. Is it good? Is it bad? It's in relationship with circumstance and balance within the psyche, within the self, within the individual body. If you're salt deficient, more salt is good, but not too much, or it'll kill you. Too little, too much, it kills you. Same with acid and alkaline. An acid diet, it's all acid diet and creating stomach problems, whatever, it'll kill you. You have to find these balance points. So every face in the psyche has a positive and negative potential relative to our well-being. And one of the archetypes is called the warrior. Well, the warrior has a positive and negative expression. Think of being in a really terrific mode of writing a beautiful book, and someone texts you to watch a cat movie on YouTube. Well, the warrior is the one that says, no phones in the writing room, no interruptions, I'm going to focus on my creativity. No. But think of the opposite situation. You're binge watching Netflix with popcorn and ice cream and haven't been out of the house in days. And someone calls you and says, let's go for a walk, and you say no. Well, it's the warrior again. The warrior is preventing you from getting exercise, being healthy, having balance in your life, or it is enabling you to say no to something that you need to say no to say yes to something that's much more important. A poem, an inspiration, that in that moment is more conducive to your sustainable well-being because it's bringing you into center. And so you have the sage, the fool, the innocent, the orphan, the warrior, the caregiver, the seeker, the lover, the destroyer, the creator, the ruler, the magician. It's just a color circle with a fairly rudimentary lens that's refracting the incredible infinite complexity of the psyche down to 12 core colors. Now, are these black and white? Of course not. Is there a continuum between fool and wise one? Is there a continuum between warrior and lover? Do each Is the warrior always negative? No. Is it always positive? No. Do I have too much of it in this moment? Maybe. Too little? Or is it applied in the wrong way? Maybe I have too much warrior stopping new opportunities, but not enough warrior saying no when I'm focused on my core objective. So I'm too distracted from my goals because I don't have enough warrior there, and I'm too blocked from new opportunity because I have too much warrior. Anytime something new comes, I say no automatically. And my warrior is very good at making sure I don't grow or experience anything outside my comfort zone, which is very small. So I've got a great warrior defending me against growth and opportunity, and nothing at all defending my goals. And so it's this mathematical equation of how to develop an identity, a pattern of thinking, feeling, action, and speaking that accelerates my direction towards sustainable well-being and away from chronic unnecessary suffering is the human enterprise. It's the enterprise of all consciousness. To develop a model of reality, and this is the other thing, we don't deal with reality. The fool, the innocent, the orphan, that's not real. It's a model for interacting with an infinite color spectrum that's too complex for us to grasp consciously. We think of like the 4 agreements or the 7 habits of highly effective people. They're not real. They're a model that allows us to navigate a far more complex reality with infinite distinctions that is real, but that is too complex for us to deal with. So we've got to dumb down reality into a map of reality. Think of it as a Google map. The Google map is not reality. It is a dumbed down model of reality that's useful because it only shows street corners and lines. And that's all you need to know to get to the destination in your car. But it doesn't tell you how many pine needles were on the last tree you passed. It doesn't know. It's not reality. It's a map of reality that is useful in a given situation. And so the same is true with the fool. It's not reality. It's a map of reality that can allow you to notice where am I roughly within the psyche. It's a very crude way of saying, wow, I've got a lot of warrior energy and very little lover energy. And my warrior is busy destroying my life and fighting all my friends and leaving me wide open to my enemies. Okay, so I'm imbalanced, one. I've got a lot of one energy and nothing of the other. So I'm out of balance, so that's not going to be very graceful. It's going to be very difficult. And my pattern of engaging my imbalanced energy is highly destructive. So I will create lots of pain, which if I don't know how to solve it, will create lots of fear of more pain, which if I don't know how to solve that, will ultimately paralyze me and keep hammering away at me until I either die or develop a different operating system. And the different operating system will be housed in a new identity. Now, there is a map of identity that goes beyond just the thought, feeling, etc. The thinking, feeling, action, and speaking pattern that we can recognize, that's me or that's not me, has some further distinctions in this map of identity. One of them is paradigm. Now, the paradigm is the screen. So you're looking at this, and you're looking at a set. You're looking at a set. So this is outside the set, isn't it? Now, there's a lot of stuff out here. 99.9% of all existence is not in here. It's out here. You can't see it. Why? Because it doesn't fit within the paradigm of this screen. So if you're looking at the screen, you can't see what's outside the screen. Now, all thoughts exist within a paradigm. Feelings are produced by thoughts. Actions stem from thoughts. You could even say beliefs are a form of thought. So your paradigm creates the screen in which certain thoughts are going to thrive and certain are not. For example, the paradigm of capitalism is the measurement of reality based on how much money you produce with other money or with labor. So if that's the paradigm, then everything that has nothing to do with money doesn't exist within the paradigm. So if you're focused on capitalism, it's going to seem very, very important that you cut down those trees. But if you're focused on sustainability, that's a different paradigm. And then suddenly you look at how many trees were there 1,000 years ago, how many trees are there today, how many people were there 1,000 years ago, how many people today. If you're focused on sustainability rather than capitalism, suddenly you have a different picture. So the paradigm determines the thought, which determines the action. So all identities are nested in paradigms. All identities have a mix, a recipe within the archetypal color spectrum of the psyche. Now, all identities that you want to relate to, they have a name. So you could say my party identity, my work identity, my playful identity, whatever it is, they have a name, and they can be a context name, or you can name them. You can say, this one is Fred, he's the one I am like this one is this one is this. But you need some way to interact and understand them. Now, identities also have an iteration, and there's something called an adaptive persona or an adaptive identity. Now, an adaptation is you developed an authentic identity when you were born, but that didn't work very well. And so you adapted. And then that didn't work very well, and so you adapted again. Now, the authentic identity is the most direct individual path to survival, security, love and belonging, and self-expression, self-realization. But you're not in isolation. You're in a cult environment. And so if your cult values rational thought more than empathy, so you say, oh, Dad, look at that homeless person out there. Let's go give him some food. That's empathy, right? But Dad believes in rational thought, in a cult that deifies rational thought. And he says, no, son, we don't do that, because you have to think rationally. If you give this person food for doing nothing, they won't do anything. Again, they'll just wait around for food. So the rational conclusion is you can't give people food or they will be lazy. And then you learn that your empathy isn't welcome, but your rationality is. Because your father says this with a patronizing attitude that lets you know in no uncertain terms, from their body language and tone of voice and all that, that if you are empathic, you are inferior. And if you are rational, you are superior. Now, do you want to be superior or inferior in the eyes of your father, who you depend on for survival, security, love and belonging, etc.? You want to be superior. So you say empathic persona, go away. Rational persona, come in. So that's an adaptation. Now, these are iterations. Now, some personas and some identities have been iterated and iterated and iterated, so where there's no connection with the original source energy. I can't even find myself in there. I'm behaving the exact opposite of the way I want to be, because so many me's were killed off by being attacked. So the iteration level equals kind of the level of integrity with the individual. You have, in a very unhealthy culture, people pretending to be the exact opposite of what they feel and believe and think, so that they can survive, feel secure, etc., etc. You also have the causal relationship, like the history that formed that identity. Because identities do not just appear, poof. An identity is a response to an environment in relation to how that environment rewards and meets people's needs. The needs are the same for everyone and always have been. But every cult says you have to do this and we'll meet your needs, otherwise not. So the causal path. The other thing with iterating identities is, are they moving from pain to well-being, and how? So and this is kind of an interesting thing, because you can have self-destructive environments that create self-destructive identities. For example, in a drinking environment, if someone says, when they're all drinking, I've got work tomorrow and I'd like to show up on time. Well, everyone says, poo, boo, get him another drink, and they hold him down and throw him another vodka, and then that identity is gone because now he's more drunk. And if he tries to get to the door, they knock him down again, put another vodka down him, and only when he's dysfunctional and, of course, isn't going to show up on time for work the next day are they happy, right? So now he's got belonging and love. He's a drunk with drunks, but there's a movement towards pain. In order to belong and be part of the gang, he's got to destroy his life. And so that, is there a movement towards well-being as the iterated identity, or is it a downward spiral towards pain? The hierarchy of dominance is important to understand, and it ties in with cult rank. So in America, there is a list for the richest people in the world. It's called the Forbes 400 list. Now, there's no list for the kindest people in the world. There's no list for the most generous people. There's no list for the most competent people to walk their dogs, because these are not valuable in a capitalist cult. They're only valuable in an empathic cult. So the money-making persona, the part of a person that makes money, is high-ranking in a capitalist cult. In America, you can be ugly, you can be fat, you can be stupid, you can be poorly educated, all the other stuff that are generally considered beneficial in the cult of America. But if you're the richest person in the world, you get a pass, right? Because that's ranked highly. So the same is true within your individual ego. You could be a terrific artist, but your ego assesses that you're in a sociopathic environment in which that doesn't mean you're going to survive or feel secure, so you rank your artistry low. You say, yeah, I'm a good artist, get out of here. You say, yeah, I can play the flute, get the fuck out of here. You say, I could do this and I would make 10% more money. Aha, I'm interested. Because I want to survive my cult, and my cult is interested in my earning capacity. And so it's important to know where a given identity in the cult is ranked, because it usually correlates to where we rank the same identity. Because, why do parents traditionally kill off the artistic visions of their children, or the idealistic visions? Because the idealistic visions are not ranked well. The parents say, no, you're not going to enjoy living in a cult that looks down on you for being altruistic. So why don't you learn to be selfish and make more money? Because you will enjoy being in a cult that says, aren't you wonderful? You just sued another corporation and tied up hundreds of people in litigation and this and that. Aren't you important? And so hierarchy of dominance within a given persona is an important thing to understand within your psyche, within your ego structure, which usually mirrors the cult around you. The brain level of the identity. We have sociopathic identities from our reptilian brain. We have highly reactive emotional identities from our limbic brain. We have rational identities from our intellect. We have empathic identities from our empathic brains. And we have transcendent identities from our transcendent brain. So it's useful to know on what level of brain is this identity coming out of, which again usually correlates to the dominant experience of the individual. There are very few people walking around with transcendent identities because we are living primarily in a reptilian verging on rational environment. So the underlying structure of most of the cultures on the planet today are reptilian, which are fear-based, moving towards rational with a dash of empathy. There's a direction towards empathy, but the underlying law is reptilian. Capitalism is reptilian. Politics are reptilian. Violence and war is reptilian. It's the survival of the fittest because they can. Might is right is a reptilian function. Now that's the oldest brain. It's 200 million years old. It's how crocodiles evolved. So the dominant function is still the crocodile mentality of a crocodile, just living through the rationalism of a human. And of course, because humans are rational and imaginative, when you apply fear-based reptilian programming through the science of human knowledge, you can create incredibly sophisticated models of cruelty and dominance. But every identity has a mix from the brain, from the most transcendent and innocent, which, by the way, it's important to notice that in a transcendent environment based on empathy and unity, transcendent thinking is the most intelligent thinking mathematically. Because if you create an entire species that thinks and functions transcendently with competence, meaning you have emotional intelligence, you have relational literacy, you have trauma literacy and repair, you have a healthy culture based on the science of good health, which is not the science of making drug companies rich. It's the science of preventing diseases and responding ethically to the diseases that are caused. When you have an empathic culture operating from the empathic brain, the level of intelligence is exponentially higher than a reptilian identity operating in a reptilian culture. Because intelligence is the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. The transcendent brain, referencing rationalism, can create higher levels of sustainable well-being than any other brain in the body. But the caveat is that you have to do it together. One transcendent human being surrounded by reptiles is dead. 100% reptilian, reptilian individuals and a reptilian individual can survive with consuming lots of energy to manage fear and put up defense. Because if you're surrounded by reptiles, your safety depends on the thickness of your walls and the power of your guns, which means you've got to divert energy to walls and guns, and your lifespan statistically is not very high. In a transcendent cult, operated with transcendent rationalism, the transcendent brain referencing data, that's when the species functions synergistically as a whole. There's no need for guns. There's no need for walls. There's no need for locks. So all that energy goes into benefiting the environment, creating more and more well-being for more and more people, more and more efficiently. So you have an exponential increase in intelligence that is reflected by an exponential increase in efficiency in the amount of energy it takes to create and sustain well-being. Now, on the low end of that, you have low mastery, high levels of helplessness, high intensity, high levels of loneliness, high levels of unconsciousness, and you have toxic concentration and imbalance, and no map out of that hell. That's how a cult can destroy an otherwise viable and good identity that doesn't jive with the cult. So if you're an artist, and the more you create the beauty of your art, the less people pay you, the more your landlord evicts you, the more people laugh at you for being evicted, etc., and you can't do anything about it, then the more you pursue what may be the healthiest identity of that cult. Because a highly sociopathic cult can truly evolve with art in a direction that is more intelligent. But a highly sociopathic cult is not intelligent enough to understand that it's not intelligent, and so it will kill off its own medicine. The psyche will give birth to people that could be medicinal, and the cult will kill them off because it lacks the intelligence to integrate their gifts. So, the way that an individual relates with this, there's the law of intelligence, which says that if an identity produces more well-being as a result of existing per unit of energy than the status quo, that's a step in the direction that's intelligent and must be supported. So the law of intelligence supports minorities because the highest level of intelligence is always located in a minority. And you can look at that mathematically with the bell curve of adaptation. The bell curve of adaptation says that every new thing on the planet was originally found by one person. And then if it did a good job at something, then 2 people found it and adopted it, and then 3 people. Well, 3 people is a minority. So at the time that a new technology was adopted by 3 people and benefited all of their lives, the majority was still doing the old way, which was less intelligent. But the thing is, the law of mass is a different law. Intelligence is the law of efficiency and return on sustainable well-being and avoiding chronic suffering. The law of mass is the law of the majority. So the majority is always less intelligent than a distinct minority. Not all distinct minorities, because you can have distinctly negative minorities that are lagging behind the majority. And then you can have distinctive positive minorities that are ahead of the majority in the evolutionary process. The evolution towards what? Towards sustainable well-being, consuming less and less energy per unit of well-being created. So the law of mass basically says that if you're right and you're surrounded by 4 bozos, you lose anyway. Because if 4 bozos say, you got to do this or we're going to beat you up, you do it, even if it's dumb, or you get beaten up. That's the law of mass. And of course, when your entire government, like when Edward Snowden upheld the Constitution and sacrificed his career to do so, and his entire government mobilized literally millions of dollars of taxpayer money to hunt down someone for telling the truth and fulfilling their constitutional oath, because Edward Snowden didn't swear an oath to do what his boss wanted him to do. He swore an oath to the Constitution, which his bosses broke. And for upholding his oath, he was hunted around the world and became a fugitive in Russia as the only country that would grant him asylum, that the U.S. couldn't dominate and bully into refusing him asylum. Because the U.S. military and intelligence agents have very little interest in the Constitution and a tremendous interest in a sociopathic power ethic that they use with the largest military engine that the planet has ever seen to bully and intimidate countries all around the world, not based on the law of intelligence, but the law of mass, the law of might makes right. And covering it, of course, with pretending that it's always for the best of everyone, which anyone who does a little bit of digging and says, exactly how was it in my interest that you put my children in debt to kill a million Iraqis for fake weapons is just one of many examples. How was that in my or my children's interest that you blew explosives into the atmosphere at a time when our planet's atmosphere is failing? How was that in my interest? See, that's the law of intelligence. But the law of mass always trumps intelligence. And usually the majority is too stupid to know that it's stupid. And it's operating instinctively to maintain a status quo because a traumatized majority. So you have a continuum of intelligence which equals a continuum of change. The most intelligent people are rapidly changing towards creating more sustainable well-being and less chronic suffering with less and less energy, which means change. It's an endless continuum. Now, change equals the unknown, which is every trauma survivor's nightmare. Every single one of us who was beaten by a giant, a parent, a teacher, a bully, a sibling, prayed fervently, when I grow up, I never want to be helpless and in the unknown situation again. I want control. Well, you can't control the unknown. So every trauma survivor who only mastered their paralysis and rage by staying in the known and getting control of it is totally against the unknown, which means they're totally against change. So highly traumatized cultures fight change tooth and nail. Well, we have a traumatized majority that will pick avoiding change ahead of chronic pain from the mediocrity of the status quo. So equals fear of change equals a continuum of fear. So the more intelligence and change there is, the more fear there is, which is a resistance to change. And so, you have a history in our species, whether it's Galileo or anything else, being attacked by the majority power. Jesus was crucified by the Romans for suggesting that there'd be a nicer way of doing things than beheading people in public and all of that. Galileo was almost killed by the Catholic Church. The young boys who revealed that 5% of Catholic priests are pedophilic were demonized, ignored, and given a hard time by the Catholic Church, who protected the pedophilic priests by sending them to resorts to coach one another on avoiding detection before being sent back to innocent communities. So one other thing that ties in with this thing of kind of identity and the context of the system is system evolution. And if we look over here